January 1976. The police in Greenwich, Connecticut are investigating the death of 15-year-old Martha Moxley. Martha was found beaten and stabbed in her parents' garden the previous Halloween. Their inquiries have led them to Martha's neighbours, and the last people she was with the night she died, the prominent Skakel family. The Skakels are heirs to the Great Lakes Coal and Coke Company, and they are relatives of another prominent family, the Kennedys. Both the Skakels and the Kennedys are connected by a problem known as the curse. It refers to the high-profile tragedies and scandals that they have faced, some of which have involved the death of women connected to the family. Was Martha another victim of this so-called curse? The Greenwich police were starting to think so. Meanwhile, the local town felt that Martha was actually a victim of a completely different curse, the Greenwich curse, which refers to the town's history of unsolved murders. Was Martha's investigation going to go cold? Or were the police about to break the case and prove that Martha was a victim of the Skakel and Kennedy clan? Welcome to True Crime with Morty, a podcast by a criminologist and her dog. I am your host TJ, and this is Morty. Each week we will be doing deep dives into murders and mysteries from all around the globe, using my background in law and criminology to provide a full account of true crime stories. If this sounds good to you, please consider subscribing, and thank you for joining us today. This is the third episode of Mystery on Walsh Lane, the Martha Moxley murder. In the last episode, we discussed how the police started their investigation in the autumn of 1975, and despite looking at all the Belle Haven residents closely, they were initially wondering if an outsider had attacked Martha. However, the crime scene pointed out being someone close to the victim who was also familiar with the area. Their inquiries had kept leading them back to Thomas Skakel, the last known person with Martha on the night she died. The motive was believed to be connected to an attempt at a sexual assault. Martha had not been raped, but her clothing was removed, and the police deduced from this that an attempted rape had gone wrong. But it didn't make sense why the perpetrator didn't follow through on this attack, or use less force to control Martha. Why so much violence if that rape hadn't occurred? Why kill her? It doesn't really make sense. So if the motive wasn't rape, then what was it? Well, if the Skakels were involved, then the answer may lie in Martha's diary. Martha kept a diary, and it was filled with all the normal things teenagers experience. In amongst all the anecdotes of her friends and worries about school, there were some clues to the motive of the crime. According to her diary pages of the last 2 months, Tommy Skakel and his brother Michael had both shown an interest in dating her. Martha had only met the Skakels less than 3 months before she died. In her diary page for the 19th of August 1975, she describes meeting the boys for the first time. By September 1st, she is pool hopping with them at night along with their brother David. She hangs out with them again on the 7th of September and again on the 15th with some other friends. On the entry for the 12th of September, she describes being alone with Tommy in his car. He takes her for a drive and she's, quote, practically sitting in his lap, end quote. And he keeps putting his hand on her knee. The diary pages discuss Tommy and Martha flirting and him showing an interest in her sexually. However, by the 17th of September, Martha is already growing tired of the Skakel clan. Her entry that day indicates that Michael and her had got into an argument. According to Martha, Michael was, quote, out of it, end quote, and accusing her of leading Tommy on. He was, quote, being a total asshole, end quote, and this was followed by a physical fight between Tommy and Michael. I really have to stop going over there, Martha writes at the end of this entry. Martha saw the Skakels a couple more times in September and October of 1975, bumping into them at events and hanging out with Tommy for the penultimate time on the 21st of September. 5 weeks later, she went to the Skakels for the last time, the night she died. The Skakels have always maintained that they fully cooperated with the police from the day Martha died and throughout the whole investigation. However, Rushton's initial reaction to the murder seemed to be less about cooperation and more about circling the wagons. On the day of the murder, Rushton Skakel Sr. had actually been away on holiday, which was why Ken Littleton was in charge of the Skakel children. But on hearing about Martha, he cancelled the rest of his trip, immediately returned home, and invited lawyers to the house. One of Michael's friends remembers going to visit the Skakel house that week and being told that Michael was, quote, not available for socialising that day, which, looking back, seems a little odd. On the one hand, Rushton Skakel Sr. may have just been concerned about his children's safety after a child was killed next door. However, gathering lawyers, cancelling his holiday, and stopping the kids seeing their friends seems a little bit more than just safety concerns. His children were under the supervision of other adults while he was away, and although they will have to speak to police as witnesses, why would lawyers be needed? This was a bit premature. Almost like he suspected they would need legal representation before the police had even begun their investigation. An argument could be made that such a prominent family with lawyers on retainer would probably always call their lawyers, but still, instructing lawyers at this point seems overly cautious, especially compared to how Rushton Skakel behaved when the police did want to investigate the children. The other thing to note is that the Skakel house changed after Martha died. Michael's best friend at the time, Andy Pugh, felt that the house that was once completely open and friendly had suddenly gone into lockdown. In fairness to the Skakels, a lot of the Belle Haven residents were changing their security measures and routines after Martha died, literally due to the fact a murder had happened in their street. But it was noted that there was a dramatic change in the Skakel house at this time. Despite his caution with lawyers and his newfound control over the household, Rushton Skakel was welcoming and seemingly helpful to the police. You would expect someone who put his house on lockdown and some of the family lawyers to basically slam the door in detectives' faces, but he was quite the opposite. Between November 1975 and January 1976, Rushton and the police had a friendly relationship. He would agree to answer their questions and gave them permission to interview the children. He would even make sure they had lunch most days. The Skakel household was important to the investigation for two reasons. Martha had spent her last hours with the Skakel children, last seen with Tommy obviously, but had been in their car and visited their house that night. So obviously the Skakel children were important witnesses in one way or another. The second is that during their inquiries into the neighbourhood, the police had realised that the murder weapon had come from the Skakel household, as they were the only family that owned a set of Tony Penner golf clubs in the whole of Belle Haven. The set had belonged to Rushton's late wife, Anne with an E Skakel, and had been given to Julie Skakel when her mother had passed away. The golf clubs were not exactly a smoking gun, as the Skakel children left all their clubs scattered around their property, where basically anyone could pick them up. It wasn't as if they were the only people who had access to these clubs. But the combination of it belonging to them and Martha being around the Skakel children, of course, warranted further investigation, even if it was just to eliminate them. The Skakels spoke to the police about October 30th. According to Julie Skakel, their tutor and guardian for the night, Ken Littleton, took the children to dinner and drinks at the Belle Haven Club, along with cousin Jimmy Terrian and Julie's friend, Andrea Shakespeare. They all returned home and continued drinking and playing backgammon, then settled down to watch TV. At 8:45, Michael spotted Martha, Helen and Jeff at the back door to the house and invited them in. Then the four of them went to sit in the Lincoln car outside. Tommy reports the same story to police, adding that he also joined the kids in the car outside after he grabbed a cassette tape from the house. He neglects to tell police officers about his touching of Martha's leg, but the other car occupants had told police this. Between 9:15 and 9:25, Rushton Skakel Jr., John Skakel and cousin Jimmy took over the car to drive Jimmy back to his parents' estate. Michael is believed to have left with them. At this point, Helen and Jeff leave for their respective homes, and Tommy and Martha are left alone at the side of the Skakel property. Helen and Jeff tell police that Tommy was play fighting with Martha and she fell or was pushed down, but he denies this when he's asked about it. Tommy insists that Martha and he said goodbye at the side door and that she went home from his backyard into Walsh Lane. This version of events is almost backed up by Andrea Shakespeare. If you remember from last episode where we talked about the timeline of events, around this time, Andrea Shakespeare and Julie were leaving the house as well. Julie was going to drive Andrea home, but she left her car keys in the house. So Andrea returns to the front door to get Julie's keys and hears Tommy's conversation with Martha. According to Andrea, Tommy said something about not being interested in the plan for that night and he wanted to go inside. I find this very strange, as my understanding is at this point Martha was due to go home and she was already late for her curfew, and so the evening was over and there were no further plans. Was there a plan to meet up later that evening? With whom and for what purpose? This question becomes more relevant later, but for now it does seem to confirm that Tommy said goodnight to Martha and she went home, as that's what Andrea overheard. Tommy further tells police that he went inside to do a report on Abraham Lincoln. for school. He worked on his report for a bit and then went to watch The French Connection with the tutor Ken Littleton in the master bedroom. Ken Littleton confirms that he saw Tommy at around 10:20 and they watched some of the film together. He told police that Tommy seemed normal and was wearing the same clothes as he was at dinner, apart from his tie being removed, and that Tommy left his company at around 10:30 p.m. So on the face of it, this all seems pretty straightforward. Tommy goes home to complete his report and hangs out with his tutor. But I kind of have to call BS on this, because on hearing this story, I thought it was weird that a teenager would turn down hanging out with his friend, decide not to go off to his cousin's house with his brothers and have fun there, and instead actively choose to go and do a school report. I think that most teenagers would rather spend time with their peers, particularly one who is like a crush or an interest in that way, or even hang out with their siblings if they're going to their cousin's house and having fun, then go home and work on a report. Even the most studious of kids would probably ignore their homework in this situation. And Tommy was not a studious kid. Part of the reason they had a live-in tutor was his appalling grades and his refusal to work. And it turns out I was right to be suspicious of this story. But the thing that the police found odd about Tommy's story was that he didn't remember any details about his time with Martha that evening, especially what they talked about by the door. This was his last time seeing Martha right before she was killed. It may not have been a particularly significant conversation at the time, but they expected him to know more than he did, given that it was his very last interaction with Martha. It was weirder still that he then remembered every move he made after entering the house. He had an almost minute-by-minute breakdown of which room he went into and everything that he did right up until he saw Ken Littleton and watched the film. Yet he couldn't remember anything about Martha. This, in addition to him contradicting the other witness reports about him and Martha play fighting and stuff, made him a key suspect for the police. Once the police had discovered that the murder weapon was from the Skakel home, they wanted the rest of the set of clubs. When Rush and Skakel returned from his trip, the police went to see the Skakels and asked for them to be handed in. After looking around the house, it was discovered that they had actually gone missing, and rather than the police look for them, they gave Judy permission to search for them and give them to the police if she found them. So none of the invasive searching that had occurred at Edward Hammond's house, just a call us if you find them kind of situation. This, I do not understand. I really feel it demonstrates the police feeling somewhat powerless or in awe of these particular Belle Haven residents, as I cannot think of a logical reason why the connection to the golf club, the murder weapon, would lead to a half-assed search. Rushton had agreed to the police searching for the weapon anyway, and if they had been told no, then they could have got a search warrant, presumably. Why were they so afraid of them and not Edward Hammond or any of the other residents? On November 3rd, the police attended the Skakel home to request that Tommy go with them to take a polygraph test so that they could verify what he had told them about the night of Martha's death. He was the first person connected to the case to do so. Technically, Tommy was a suspect and a witness from day one, but at this stage it was more of a routine part of the investigation, as they were still examining the whole neighbourhood for information, and then the police had their outsider theory as well. So Tommy is taken to Connecticut State Polygraph Unit for his examination. According to officers Ted Brosco and Jim Lunny, Tommy looked tired, and he confirmed that he'd been up most of the night before, and it was already around 10 p.m. when the test was being administered the next day. This, combined with his epilepsy medication, was believed to be the cause for the inconclusive result on the test. He was asked 4 questions, one of which was, "Did you kill Martha?" And so an inconclusive result was not enough for the officers. He had to do a retake on the 9th of November, and he did pass his second polygraph. But as you're probably aware, polygraphs are not admissible in court due to their reliability being based on the competency of the examiner and the questions being asked. People who are guilty can pass due to not being asked the right questions. They may answer honestly to things that don't quite fit what happened. Equally, an innocent person may seem deceptive if the examiner is incompetent at reading their reactions or, again, asking the wrong question. To perform a polygraph examination, the examiner has to look at the reaction to simple questions first. These are known as irrelevant questions, and they determine the baseline physiological response. These are questions about the suspect or witness that aren't related to the case and with the answers that the examiner already knows. And this allows them to see the body's response when they're telling the truth. Then they compare these responses to responses of the main questions about the investigation to see if the body responds the same. If yes, then the person is telling the truth. If no, then deception is indicated. In some cases, like Tommy's, it is inconclusive, meaning that a definitive answer of truth or deception is just not clear. Polygraphs do not indicate guilt or innocence for this reason. They are subjective at best, and at worst, if the examination is flawed, then the conclusions are completely irrelevant. In some cases, doing them too early in the investigation process can lead to the wrong questions being asked due to a lack of information, and so it can exonerate people too early. How they are useful for investigations is that they can indicate which suspects or witnesses appear to be telling the truth and which may be withholding or lying. It's not finite, but just something to help with police suspicions. Officers cannot use them as evidence, but they can indicate a direction for the investigation. If you have multiple suspects, it can help reduce that list to the ones that show deception, or it could confirm a witness account. Equally, if someone is unwilling to take a polygraph at all, it could indicate they have something to hide. In 1975, polygraphs were not widely used. The FBI polygraph unit was not actually set up until 1978, and even today the test can be affected by not just the examiner, but the mental and physical health of the person taking the polygraph. Greenwich police were not dependent on these results, but they seem to have put a lot of stock in their outcomes. As mentioned in the previous episode, Peter Zaluka, Martha's boyfriend, had passed. Tommy did on his second try. Other suspects and witnesses who were polygraphed were John Skakel, Tommy's older brother, who left in the Lincoln car before Martha was killed, Franz Wittine, the Skakel's gardener, Judy and Mart, who were the ladies who drove the red car, and Edward Hammond, who of course was investigated as well. Every single one of these people had passed. But one person who didn't take a polygraph was actually Michael Skakel. There's no real explanation for this other than that the police believed that Michael was at the Terrians at the time of her murder and that he didn't return until 11:30, and then Michael had told police he went straight to bed at that point. But so had John Skakel. So I don't understand why he got a polygraph but not Michael. And of all the Skakel children, Michael was the one who knew Martha best and had spent that evening with her. This seems like a massive oversight by the police, as Michael was a key witness to that night, and they are questioning people like Franz Wittine and his brother John, but not him. By late November, Tommy is firmly at the top of the police suspect list. He may have passed his polygraph, but the police know that there are inconsistencies in what he was saying, and he was the last known person with Martha. In December, they re-interview all of the children who were with Martha that night, and it's Tommy's turn to speak to police on the 13th of December. He repeated his statement about saying goodnight to Martha at 9:30. Now, the police had been told that Tommy was slow and that he had learning difficulties, but the police found that although Tommy took a while to answer, he didn't seem that slow mentally. He seemed a little vacant and not emotional, but there was no real indication that he was struggling with this process at all. He was also lying to them. He insisted he had never touched Martha and that he wasn't interested in her. His brother liked Martha, not him. They couldn't quite prove this was a lie at this stage, and they had been told that Tommy was, quote, not smart enough to lie, but they would catch him in a lie very soon. Remember when I thought it was suspicious that Tommy would go home to complete a school report rather than hang out with his cousins or Martha? Turns out it was a lie, and I was right to be suspicious. The police went to speak to the teacher at Tommy's school, asked about the report to confirm his alibi. The teacher was adamant that no such report existed, and Tommy was actually not due to hand in anything the week of the murder. So why the lie? What was Tommy doing? The answer would not be revealed until the mid-90s. For now, the police note that Tommy is a liar, and they continue on. They interview 200 people in town, as well as search all over for the missing golf club piece. Divers are sent to Puget Sound, and there's no luck there. Dozens of clubs are found around Greenwich, but none are the missing shaft connected to Martha's case. As all their other leads have gone nowhere, the Greenwich police have focused solely on Tommy Skakel, and in January 1976 they start to pursue Tommy more thoroughly, and this leads to the Skakels revoking their cooperation with the Greenwich police. The downward spiral begins on the 16th of January 1976 when Rushton Skakel Sr. agreed for the police to have access to Tommy's school records and medical files. The police immediately contact the Brunswick School, the Whitby School, and their psychologists. They contact Anne with an E, Skakel's obstetrician, Greenwich Hospital, and the Skakel family paediatrician. They also contacted Dr. Walter Camp, who treated Tommy for a head wound when he was younger. In 1965, Tommy had suffered a serious head injury after falling out of a car. He had been fighting with one of his siblings and got knocked out of the car where he hit his head. He was unconscious for hours and had spent 4 weeks recovering at hospital. personality had changed completely, and after this event he was prone to violent temper tantrums. His attacks appear to be mostly on inanimate objects, but it was noted that Rushton Skakel felt unable to control Tommy. According to another of Tommy's psychiatrists, when he was in a rage, he would only respond to an ex-Marine that Rushton knew, who was an abnormally large man and seemed too imposing for Tommy to ignore. The link between head injuries and the propensity for violent crime was not as well researched and identified back in 1975. I think that came out much later in the 1980s. But Tommy's pattern of behaviour was well documented. The police were made aware of his temper and tendency for violence. There were stories about him fighting with his siblings, throwing items, pulling phones out the wall. His teachers had also told police that there was an altercation in study hall where he had tried to strangle another student. So was it possible that something had caused him to lose his temper and attack Martha? Had he progressed from fighting and pulling phones out the wall to committing an actual murder? January 20th, 1976. Just 4 days after requests had been sent out for Tommy's medical and school files, a lawyer for the Whitby School by the name of Christopher Roosevelt contacts Greenwich Police to say he would be speaking to Rushton Skakel first to confirm that they definitely had his permission. He then went on to say that, quote, a battery of lawyers would, quote, claim Tommy was temporarily insane. Apparently, Mr. Roosevelt incorrectly assumed that Tommy was arrested, but was already confident that Tommy would be acquitted. I do not understand why a lawyer who doesn't represent the family would make such a statement unprompted, and compiling a defence strategy, I presume, so that no Whitby alumni would go down for murder. As always, these schools are paid for their discretion, not education. However, it does go deeper than that. The school was founded in 1958 and paid for by the Skakel family. The first classes for the Whitby School were held on the Terrian estate. Now it makes sense. January 22nd, things get weirder. The day begins with Julie Skakel arriving at the police saying she heard they are looking at school records and she is panicked. Julie is scared that the nuns at her school won't report favourably on her. The police are bewildered by this. Why does Julie think they're investigating her? Does Rushton not realise it is Tommy who is the suspect? Apparently not. That morning, Detective Steve Carroll attends the Whitby School to see the headmaster about Tommy. While he's waiting to go into the office, he discovers that Rushton Skakel Sr. and a lawyer are already there, and the minute the headmaster sees Detective Carroll, he screams at him repeatedly to get out. Then, at 1:20 p.m, Rushton Skakel Sr. delivers a letter to the police headquarters complaints desk. He is withdrawing his consent for the police to search Tommy's records. This, for me, is the hypocrisy of the Skakels. They insist that they have assisted police since day one of this investigation, and yet numerous lies were told to the police during interviews. More on that in the next episode. And the minute that it is revealed that Tommy is a suspect and the police are researching his background, they suddenly refuse access to him and these files. How is that assisting? Rushton and his lawyer head to the X house after leaving police headquarters, and it's there that Rushton Skakel collapses with chest pains and is rushed to hospital. The pains are caused by stress rather than heart failure. I have had bad news, he says. He obviously hadn't realised that the police suspected Tommy, and it was only when his lawyer and the headmaster explained it to him that he withdrew permission and collapsed from the stress of it all. This is very odd when you consider that he immediately put the house on lockdown and arranged for lawyers to attend the day that Martha died, and he has spent the last couple of months talking to the police. For him to treat it as serious, and then when it becomes serious, have a reaction that leads to such shock, doesn't really make sense. I've put this down to Rushton Skakel Sr. being out of touch with what was happening and having his issues with alcohol. But the detectives saw it somewhat differently. When detectives attended the hospital, Rushton informed them that he had hired Emmanuel Margolis, a criminal defence attorney, to represent Tommy. From now on, the police were going to need to get more creative to get any information about Tommy. The good news is that the police saw this as a sudden break in the case. They have no longer got access to Tommy, but this change of behaviour and Rushton's collapse could indicate that secrets are being revealed, that the Skakels have something to hide, and they are on the right track. What they are hiding would take almost 20 years to come to the surface, but in 1976 the police would continue to pursue the Skakels and a new suspect from Skakel House would emerge. Were the police wrong all along? Was Tommy innocent and covering for someone else? Or was this another detour? In our next episode, we will continue with our deep dive on the police investigation that spans 27 years and look at another suspect at the centre of this case. But for now, thank you for listening to True Crime with Morty. Please like, comment, subscribe and join us next week for our 4th episode of The Mystery on Walsh Lane, the Martha Moxley murder. Goodbye from me and goodbye from Morty.